And now back to the stage for Michigan's emerging EV ecosystem.
Oval projects in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Michigan, and she chairs the Michigan EV Jobs Academy. Next on our panel, we're very pleased to have Congresswoman Haley Stevenson. Pardon? Stevens, what did I say?
Stevenson.
It's late, or early, and it got late last night. The Congresswoman is a Rochester native who served as Chief of Staff to the U.S. Auto Rescue Task Force, the federal initiative responsible for saving General Motors, Chrysler, and 200,000 Michigan jobs. Representative Stevens sits on the House Committee on Education and Labor and the Research and Technology Subcommittee, where she is the ranking member. Her priorities are to protect access to health care, promote manufacturing, expand educational opportunity. And finally, we have Janine Coons, who is Chief Workforce Development Officer for the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, our sponsor today. Under her leadership, SCV has trained and or certified more than 1 million people in manufacturing. She serves on several national boards and committees. Ms. Coons has also provided testimony before Congress on manufacturing workforce issues, and Crain's Detroit Business recognized her as one of its 2018 Notable Women in Manufacturing. So thanks, panel. Glad to have you with us today. This is obviously a very vital subject to our region and our state as we move from the old world of auto manufacturing to this new, exciting electric vehicle world. And it's going to be a transition period for it's going to be disruptive. But what we know about Michigan is that we have a lot of talent already here to build on, and a lot of great people like yourselves who are going to help us get through it. So let's start with Ann Thompson with a question. Last week, your boss, Bill Ford, said Michigan and Ford Motor Company are locked in a war for talent, which is a pretty strong way to depict it. If it is a war, how do we win it here?
Well, thank you. I don't know if I would call it a war just between Ford Motor Company. I think that there is an opportunity for everyone to have better strategies for how we upskill people and reskill people for the EV world. So when Ford Motor Company is looking at how we do this, specifically in the green sites, because we're looking at the world of EV, which is very similar to the manufacturing that takes place today. However, there are some skill sets that change. There's a need for more automation, for more vision systems, mechatronics, safety, things of that nature. But when we look at it, there's really just 3 pools of talent that we can draw from. And people are either going to be employed, they're going to be unemployed, or they're going to be in school. So we've really developed strategies that take each of those big buckets, break it down into subsets, and identify how can we best reach those people to bring them into the world of advanced manufacturing. So thinking about those who are employed, maybe they need some upskilling or some reskilling. Same thing with unemployed, we're looking for shorter term programs. And then as we get into people who are currently in school, we can look at longer, more in-depth programs. And the key there is to look at stackable credentials. So ensure that people are able to kind of come in and come out as they please, and they're able to continue their learning so they can really have a great career within advanced manufacturing.
Congresswoman, perhaps more than any other industry or anything we've ever seen sort of in manufacturing, this is a public-private partnership, this move into electric vehicle making. What role do you see federal policy playing in growing the EV workforce we're going to need over the next 20 years or longer?
Well, I'd be remiss if folks here at this conference hadn't heard of President Biden's Invest in America agenda. Obviously, we have a CHIPS and Science Act that has workforce strategies. Chips are so critical to our auto industry. An Inflation Reduction Act, which has given us the Electric Vehicle Workforce Initiative, just one of the very many programs that have spun out from the IRA, investments at scale in transitioning our supply chain, our large automotive companies, but also matching it with the workforce and infrastructure considerations. And one thing that we know as lawmakers is that workforce development is infrastructure. We cannot have a successful future if we're not making coordinated and strategic investments. And it doesn't all have to come from the feds. We can set the table and set the stage, but then the dollars, as they mature down at the state level, we know that Michigan has just been awarded a big electric vehicle workforce hub. We're delighted to see that. We've got the Global Epicenter for Mobility that was awarded through Build Back Better dollars that were bipartisan. Those actually came from the first tranche of COVID monies that this new administration inherited. The other thing that we're aware of is that we are in hyper acceleration mode. Our auto industry in our state has been the profound leader in a very challenging time. You know, it's a pleasure to be on this panel with Ann and Janine Coons, two people I have tremendous respect for.
What about me, Congresswoman?
You're okay, Nolan. You're okay.
Can't forget Nolan.
He always knows how to ask the questions. Nolan Finley. But I'll just say this in conclusion, that COVID-19 wasn't that long ago.
No.
And that was a major disruption. Our auto industry, our manufacturers, not only responded to the industrial call to action, supply chain disruptions, masks, ventilators, and the like, they doubled down and continued to innovate. We are in an incredible moonshot moment. We're talking about EVs, but we also know that this is the net zero carbon emissions future that our auto industry is setting. And that ties to a bunch of technologies from EVs to hydrogen and the like. You all have been doing the innovation, and we've been matching through the public-private partnership model. We're in competition with China. We don't need to become the Chinese Communist Party. It is going to be American industrial policy that wins the day for us.
I love how you said workforce is infrastructure, though, right? And there was a study years ago, I love quoting it, but it was a Deloitte study that looked at what were the variables that were created the competitiveness, like what was an indicator of competitiveness for a country. And you could also translate that to a state, a company, and the number one variable that indicated a country's competitiveness was access to talent, right? That beat fiscal, trade, taxes, cost of labor, cost of material. It was access to talent. And I think that was so profound because I think we sometimes forget the infrastructure needed around talent. So I appreciated you saying that.
So we've been making things here, particularly cars, for an awful long time. Many of us have parents or grandparents who came to Michigan, settled here to get jobs in the auto industry. What's unique about this EV world that puts such an emphasis on talent attraction? How is it so much different than what we've always needed in terms of workers to make cars or to make parts for cars?
So I think one of the things that's changing is the technology is growing at a rate that reduces the number of independent operators that we're going to need and upskills them to be critical thinkers and troubleshooters and individuals who are able to understand trends within data that's coming at them, because we're going to have more data coming to that individual within the plant. I also think that there is a change in how the structure of manufacturing recruitment is occurring, right? And so we all know that there's a need to get more females into manufacturing. We know there's a need to get more underrepresented populations into manufacturing. And so we're trying to pull those individuals in. And maybe this is where my boss got to the war part. You know, a lot of this work used to be a nice to have. It would be nice if you had programs that went into K-12. It would be nice if you had a partnership with a community college. But nowadays it's a must have. It's not a philanthropic, aspiration. We have to develop these pipelines in to get these individuals the right training.
If I could add to that, yesterday, some of you might have heard Dan Gilbert, and he said a line that I love, which is the roles and the jobs that got you to where you are today are not necessarily the ones that are going to get you to where you're going. He didn't say the people, he said the roles, right? The structure and the roles. So it's about that evolution of roles and understanding what the skills are that are needed, and then to really capitalize on your people and understand where they're at in that journey and help develop them as well as that pipeline. I thought that was such a good analogy that he kind of used in his talk yesterday that I think ties what you just said.
Mm-hmm. Now, Congresswoman, I believe you're on the Science and Space Technology Committee, correct? In terms of bridging that talent gap to get us to where we need to be the EV manufacturing leader in Michigan, what policies do we need to put in place? What policies need to come from the federal government?
Well, Janine just hit on this in a really important way, which is we need strategies from the bottom up. We obviously need to be inclusive. And one thing that has been validated for us in Congress over and over and over again by academics, industry leaders, sometimes even government officials themselves, is that we in the United States of America are leaving talent behind. Mm-hmm. We're leaving talent behind demographically and also geographically. Mm-hmm. You know, think about our big state, the 10th largest state geographically in the union. 10th largest population-wise, largest state geographically east of the Mississippi. We have a lot of land here. Mm-hmm. And we have populations that need to be plugged in. In 2020, I started the Women in STEM Caucus, a bipartisan caucus in the Congress. It took to 2020 to have a Women in STEM caucus. Mm-hmm. And we know the numbers, we know the indicators in terms of women in STEM and women of color in STEM fields, and then also the educators. And so we've got to dig deep. And there's no better partner than SME. And I really want to plug SME. I know they're hosting the panel, but you got to look at the ways in which they're working with the state, asking the state budget to invest in K through 12 education. Mm-hmm. We need a continuum. Nolan, I passed my first bill into law within my first year in Congress, the Building Blocks of STEM Act. It was signed into law Christmas Eve 2019, but before the word COVID even entered our verbiage, right? And this was a bill to take the National Science Foundation budget, prioritize girls and K through 12 education, and then on in terms of where we're making STEM investments through the National Science Foundation. We know that we've got a big soup here. We've got major federal investments through the Department of Labor, obviously the Invest in America agenda that I've been so proud to work with our president on passing, that is transforming our economy and helping us to win that future that we talk about. We also have to take our cues, though, from local leaders as well. We've got to get in the classrooms. Things like Manufacturing Day. It's one day a year. Well, in my book, Manufacturing Day is every day. Yep. In terms of what's taking place, not just in our classrooms, but in the workforce. And what you all are ushering in, not just as an OEM, but also with your suppliers. Mm-hmm. You said technology. We are in a technology revolution yet again. We remember IoT 4 years ago. That's what we were talking about at this conference. Mm-hmm. Now we're matching IIoT with the electric vehicle future. And it's aggressive and it's asking a lot of us. And we've got to meet, frankly, the moment, which is allowing these workforce partners alongside companies, big and small, to take the time to train. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many times do you talk to a smaller manufacturer? You know, they're just meeting on-time production, let alone trying to catch their breath on the new training, the new tools, and the demands of them. They've all got the dotted line to EVs, but it's ushering in and maturing that transition.
Janine, Representative Stevenson talking about STEM education, importance of, training kids up in science, technology, and what have you. A lot of us grew up thinking about the auto industry as, muscle and steel and smoke and, not the sort of place you might expect to go and as a science major or a math major or technology major and work. I mean, how hard is it to convince young people, convince the kids in our schools that this is not your father's auto plant, that there's different sorts of opportunity? Are you trying to change that perception?
Yeah, I think it's a multifaceted issue. Definitely there are awareness issues, understanding issues, perception issues. The careers in manufacturing and certainly the auto industry have changed and evolved quite a bit. And it's our parents, as you mentioned, that maybe pass down some of that information. I think we all talk about that. But you touched on this, Nolan, when you said our career counselors play a very critical role in our country. One that we sometimes forget about, and I have a middle schooler, so I watch over. I'm like, so what did they say to you? She went on a field trip, and I asked her, like, what she got to see at what they showed, and they didn't show manufacturing. Ring, ring, called the school, But, so the idea of our parents certainly, translating what they might have thought manufacturing was down to our younger people. Our career counselors play, as I mentioned, a pivotal role to kind of reshape, but they don't know either. So again, this awareness of not only our young people, but the people who touch them and influence them is something that we need to do. But SME, and thank you, Congresswoman Stevens, for your remarks. We're a 90-plus-year-old nonprofit, and we're a national organization, but Michigan's our headquarters. This is where we are many of us are born and raised as individuals, but it's home to our organization. And so this idea of talent and what's happening in our country is certainly not unique to Michigan, but I will applaud, I know a number of you in this audience are from the space of workforce or education or our employers who are really doing an outstanding job to tackle, and I think you said a lot of that, Congresswoman Stevens, to tackle what's needed regarding workforce.
So what's the pitch to young people as they're considering, get to that point where they're deciding what direction they want to go to? What's the pitch to them to consider manufacturing?
So from our perspective, again, kind of looking at this, beginning with awareness, right? So we have to help people understand that these jobs they're bright, they're clean. In a lot of areas, they're not near as loud. Stamping is still a little loud, but other areas not so much.
But we love stamping.
But we love stamping. So it's the awareness component, and then it's that access piece, right? So when students are in high school, they need to have an opportunity to understand what this looks like. And maybe that's through work-based learning, maybe that's dual enrollment, maybe that's CTE, things that help them have that experience. Because I think that if people were able to come into a manufacturing plant, you'd be blown away by all the different moving pieces, and it's a very fast-paced, exciting environment, which I think would fit a lot of high school students' kind of need, right? A lot of people are saying, I don't want to go to a 4-year, I don't want to go and be an English major, so this is a really good path. And then I think that the other piece that we don't focus on as much as we should is confidence. And there is a piece of this where letting, especially, females and underrepresented populations understand that this is a place for them. And not just a place to go get a job, but a place where they can have a full career. And having that confidence to say, I want to go into manufacturing and not feel like it's this heavy, burdensome, dirty, nasty place where they're going to get lost, but an actual viable career. That's the other thing. So confidence is important.
And another Michigan bragging point is that we have the most number of FIRST robotics teams in the country. So, when I'm with my colleagues from California and Texas, I remind them who's training and readying the next generation. But this is such an important point about access and that other category of workforce that you're tapping into, Anne, which is our existing workforce. I know people who began their careers in a completely different industry, but then found their way to manufacturing. I have a friend who is a master's in communication from Georgetown and is now a product manager at an OE because of that technology driver and because of those linkages. So we're not necessarily in a desperation moment on recruiting and retaining talent. Where we're challenged is by meeting this moment where policymakers, and we've seen our Labor and Economic Opportunity Department here in Michigan do just an incredible job of hosting engagement sessions all over the state, one that I was very privileged to be able to attend in the district I represent in Oakland County, talking about some of the considerations with this transition. How do we manage it? What are the risks? What happens if we do see a closure? You know, it's not that we haven't been through tough times in Michigan. Have we always rebounded? Yes. Are we an innovation destination? Absolutely. But we've got to be responsible policymakers. So pulling on those tentacles of our existing workforce is so critical, because it really is that. It's a bow tie of the incoming pipeline, as you mentioned, and the existing.
Yeah, if I could add, you reminded me of something that we're working on, which is using AI, artificial intelligence. One of the challenges as employers, and I think we can all put ourselves in the shoes, you have your employee base, as you mentioned, your current employees, and you might know the skills they have in the job that they're in right now, but you don't necessarily know the skills, or you remember the skills that they had maybe in a career before they were in that job. Mm-hmm. And so how do you understand the skills matrix of your organization, so that when you are looking and things are expanding, that you could tap Nolan and go, oh, Nolan, you had a background before you did this in electrical engineering. I didn't know that. We now need more electrical engineers in our organization. And you can help transition people and spot that talent faster and better. And I think that's something we're all trying to work towards, to how do you mobilize your existing resources to move to where you need to go.
So when Henry Ford was staffing up his auto plants in the early part of the last century, he drew people not only from every state in the country, but from every corner of the world came here to make cars. Is there a way to better use immigration policy to bring in the talent we need in our auto plants today?
Well, we absolutely need to hear from the business community loud and clear. In Southeast Michigan, we know that we are a global destination, and that Ford was really proud to hire its first female engineer who came from India. We have a competitive edge because of our diversity, and yet, Nolan, I'll be honest, we have immigration policies that are stuck in last century and aren't necessarily meeting the time. We share a border with Canada, and we see our Canadian counterparts being able to attract global talent at scale because they've modernized our immigration system. So it is a real pleasure to be at a conference hosted by our regional chamber, having this conversation. But if I could just bring you all to Washington with me, you'd see very quickly how political this conversation gets. We know we've got to have rule of law. We also have a crisis at our southern border that has been inherited from one president to the next, and yet we're too busy finger pointing rather than solution making, and we are absolutely paying the price. I'll tell you, Nolan, the other committee I serve on in Congress is a select committee on strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. I have heard from stakeholders all over the country, from Tim Cook to Bob Iger, and leading academics and the like. And every single conversation we have had on that committee, in public hearings and in private meetings, has been staple green cards to degrees. Staple green cards to degrees, because what happens is we train the talent and then we let it go. We're also in the middle of a 21st century labor movement here in the United States of America. And obviously there's sometimes friction when we're negotiating, and then we reach that negotiation, we reach those record contracts. But that talent driver is also really critical, because when we think about the electrical engineer component or the infrastructure component with hard-nosed infrastructure in terms of our grid, we want those standards coming from labor. Labor's tied, to the global considerations as well. That is part of our competitive edge as a country. But Nolan, we got to get this immigration thing right. And I'm saying this here at this conference because all of you who are tied into your various trade associations and tentacles and maybe lobbying efforts, please lean on the Congress. No, I hear you, but we've got representatives from all over this country who need to hear you as well.
Ann and Janine, you feel there's an overseas talent pool that we're neglecting or not tapping into as well as we should?
Well, I can tell you that there is not enough talent overall in our country. And so we have one of the lowest birth rates. We have what's called the enrollment cliff we were just talking about. You know, the number that are entering our education system versus those that are graduating is not the same, which means we are reducing the number year over year that will be coming out of our school systems. And I think Congresswoman Stevens talked a lot. It's not just about electrification right now. The CHIPS Act alone is a major investment in this country to reshore and bring things back. That's a good thing, but it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on an already fractured system. Think about, probably a lot of you have been hearing about the Navy's needs. You know, we're trying to build the Virginia class and the Columbia class submarines to protect our nation, our national security, our resiliency. These are important things. They can't find enough workers to do that. We just had to reduce the production of the Virginia class to accommodate the lack of workers that we have. So we need people in manufacturing, not just in automotive. So we see this across all different sectors. Again, if I look at the CHIPS Act and say that's a good thing, it is a good thing, but we had not been producing chips in our country for a long time. So we don't have the infrastructure. That's a major investment in the education system, the workforce system, and it requires people. So we're all coming after the same talent pools, up against what is sometimes perceptions of those careers, despite the complex, interesting, rewarding, high-tech, jobs that are in there. We're still up against those perceptions, which makes it difficult. So we need all the talent we can get.
So, Ann,
and I'm so sorry, let me just piggyback. So I'm not going to touch immigration because it's way out of my lane. But I will say that thinking about the people right here in the United States, we have a huge issue with the entry-level barrier that's in place, which is the high school diploma. So in order to work at Ford Motor Company, the minimum requirement is a high school diploma. I am astonished by the number of individuals we have in the United States who don't have a high school diploma, or equivalent, right? And so I think that if we could focus into that group, that's a group of very potentially talented individuals that are just off the market. And it's not just at Ford Motor Company. That is really the bare minimum for any type of manufacturing role.
So Ann, you were in charge of attracting talent to Tennessee for a long time. Now at Ford, you've added Michigan and Kentucky to that portfolio. As you're out there looking for people for jobs in these various states, is it more difficult to attract people to Michigan than those other places you work with?
No, so I don't actually attract people, like I'm not talent attraction or recruitment or HR. I'm just building those pipelines. So I will say some of the differences I've seen is that in Tennessee, we have an incredibly good education infrastructure, as in there's a lot of, there's a technical college within 30 minutes of every individual, right? So, which is amazing. It's like, it gets back to your point of human resources being infrastructure,
and
your
it's
education
free, right?
system. It is through the Tennessee Promise and Reconnect, which has been replicated by Michigan. So those opportunities are also there. That makes it easier, but the programs aren't necessarily there. I think Michigan is winning in the fact that you have such a history just entrenched in manufacturing, and you have so many more people who consider careers in engineering and are very well aware of the opportunities in technology that doesn't exist as much down south. So I think that there are pluses and minuses to all groups, but I think that really the core of what I do around working with that K-12, with those technical community colleges and the universities, and then also the labor systems to get people who are unemployed and underemployed into those roles, that's pretty similar all across the United States. It's a challenge, I think, everywhere.
But it does seem like so many of our issues come back to the broken K-12 system here, or the underperforming K-12 system here. In Tennessee, did you find that the business community was far more involved in the schools and in promoting better schools and supporting better schools?
I did. I'm just now dipping my toe in. I will say I'm in the process of moving to Michigan, so this summer I will become an official Michigander.
I've got a great district for you to move to.
I'm recruiting
Very excited. Moving up the whole family, 3 boys, a dog, a husband, some fish, some geckos, like everybody's coming. But I think that, I think I have a lot to learn in that space, and I think it's really challenging to compare the states because, again, you just have different different pockets of different opportunities, and really and truly it's a national issue, trying to get more of these dual enrollment and CTE courses and the stacked credentials into K-12 so that people have a better understanding of what it looks like on the other side. Because I think in that space you just get kind of lost, right? And you're like, well, I don't know where I'm going after this, so let's just stop. If they could see that next step, I'm convinced we would have more people who complete high school and go on to additional careers.
And you're working with schools all over the country.
Yeah, so a couple comments there. I'm thinking, I won't name the states, but there's states that are very envious of Michigan and what we're doing. So we get a lot of those kind of questions and comments, and they're also gunning for us too. So, us keeping our game up here in Michigan is very critical, because again, it's a very competitive landscape. And so we have a program inside of high schools. It's called PRIME, Partnership Response in Manufacturing Education. And it is all about career and technical education inside the high schools. We're equipping, it's a very comprehensive program where we work with that local area to look at what those labor needs are, what are the skills, what are the jobs. We're doing this across the country, but I will proudly say we have 110 of these high schools. 50 of them are in Michigan, and that has a lot to do with people in this room. Michigan Manufacturers Association is a very good partner, employers, the state of Michigan, a lot of support for that, and Michigan is leading the way, and again, other states are looking at that, but we're well ahead here in Michigan. But that program is about identifying what those skills that are needed, and then actually going back into the schools, partnering again with the employers, but the educators in the district, and putting the right equipment in place. So we're actually sourcing, right? So we might be putting a robot, some 3D printers, right? Welding, whatever it might be appropriate, the appropriate curriculum, certifications, teacher training, professional development so that the teachers are equipped, the instructors themselves, extracurricular activities to get them involved in FIRST Robotics. So just a very comprehensive program to stand up the kinds of things that we need in our high school systems and link those to. We actually proudly say that 91% of our graduating seniors go on to either work directly, go right into manufacturing after that high school diploma with their industry certifications, or on to 2 and 4 year post-secondary degree education in manufacturing.
So, I mean, we often think of education and training as the government's job, that it's the government's job to get people ready to work and to take jobs in the community. What's the responsibility of private industry to develop the workforce they need, and how is industry stepping up to that?
I will say we've partnered really closely with SME on a program called EVPT, which is an electric vehicle production technician. And this is one of those things where I also think the states kind of blur, because the work that we have done in Tennessee around this program is easily transferable up to Michigan. We actually had a group come down to Nashville and do a tour, thanks to Mich Auto, and look at this program in more depth. But it's really around helping education see the value of those stacked credentials. And so what I mean with that is that you can have a lean, you can have a CPT, you can have a mechatronics, you can have a FANUC robots, like whatever those components are. And then SME has filled the gap with EV. So they've created some specific core modules that will be in there to help people get trained in that EV space, which is new. But really, I think that where we're adding value is helping to understand what are those skill sets, what are those courses that are really relevant today, what can you get rid of, right? What is the extra stuff that you don't need? And I think Lean is actually a great example. Lean is the base of every manufacturer, right? I mean, that is the core of what we do. It's not relevant or provided within schools currently. Like K-12 does not have a lean focus. If you go into a technical community college or a university, there's not really a lean focus. And so bringing those type of classes into the schools is something we've been able to do very successfully.
If I could add to that, so you asked about what the employer's responsibility. I think it's all of us, right? It's the education system, the workforce system, it's government, it's our employers. But employers do play a very critical role, certainly. And one of the things we try to encourage employers to do is certainly engage in the workforce system, engage with their educators, be on advisory boards, reach out and really define what those skills are. I'd like to say, especially when you think of automotive, the number one supplier, because we're all about suppliers, right? The number one supplier is the education system and the workforce system, because they're supplying your people. More important than any other component, but the other thing I would say for employers that they do have a heavy lift to do too And we know they're busy, right? Trying to productivity, innovation, quality, safety, but they've got to be an employer of choice. We can't do all this work to create a workforce system and a pipeline and educated and talent if they come in the doors and they don't have the right, opportunities to develop, because they won't stay. We have a major retention problem within our employer base. This again, nationwide against all different sectors. So all aspects have to be, raising their game.
We're in the
get
gig
this right.
economy.
Yes, right.
And
They got a lot of options, right?
and it's
Become
a
an
reality.
influencer, you can do all kinds of things. We're competing for talent in every sort of way. And I think you bring up a very good point. The gig economy is huge. Our next generation wants more flexibility. These are the kinds of things, it's not just the technical things that are going on. There is so much transformation just in our workers and their expectations and their social contract with their employer. Mm-hmm. So we've got to be on our game in every sort of way.
So where are the opportunities for collaborations, public, private, and federal, state, everybody sort of coming together on this?
I think we got to look at the taxonomy of jobs. And I know you're not in HR, but in terms of the job profiles that we are hiring for dictates exactly how we do the pipeline building, and we've got to spend that time. As Janine just said, when they are implementing Prime in a school, they're engaging an entire community, from the employer to sometimes the government, and obviously the parents and the school officials themselves. And so that's part of that race of the future. The jobs that you all are training for right now or looking to hire for aren't necessarily the job profiles that were put in the marketplace even 2-3 years ago, let alone 5-10 years ago. And so that evolution, as well as putting pressures on how we dictate these public-private partnerships, and also how we set the rules of the road. We need, as our workforce is demanding flexibility, it's also our governing structures are demanding flexibility as well. And so when you look at the pools of money that have been put out to supercharge this industrial policy agenda that we have in the United States of America, we're allowing that to be dictated by the stakeholders themselves in many, many respects. They're applying for the dollars, and they're putting together comprehensive applications on how to transition factories. This is happening before our very eyes. It blows me away. It's not just the OEs. We thought, okay, the Department of Energy's putting out this transition dollar program. Well, I go and visit Challenge Manufacturing in Pontiac, Michigan, that started on the west side of the state. They've got an application ready, and they're dug in with the community as well. So we've learned a lot of lessons over this rocky road, in some respects, that has been the beginning of the 21st century. Somewhat unprecedented, an attack on our nation just as this century began, a great recession. Obviously, we know about this pandemic, and yet at every stage, and Janine's lived through this with her career, we've seen the investments grow and the co-investments match it as a result. And that is very exciting. Do we get it right every single time? No, but we can't just sit here and do nothing. We've got to bring everyone along with us. And Nolan, I'm glad that you touched on an elephant in the room, because if we're stuck in 20th century with our immigration policies, we're just giving that talent to our neighbors. Look, we got a renegotiated trade deal with USMCA that got done a handful of years ago, plussed up Buy American content, brought, and this is the collaboration initiatives, right? You've got environmental groups and private industry saying they want the same legislative package for the first time in history. You have labor groups and private industry saying we endorse this trade deal. That's all good and fine, but we need to keep moving here. We can't freeze the progress we've made. Detroit is at its lowest levels of unemployment in 50 years, my friends. Every single person in this room should take credit for that. It's a huge deal for us. I was proud to remind President Biden of that when he was just visiting Detroit last week. And that's a success story. We're not just resting on our laurels, though. We don't, and this is what your CEO is talking about, Ann, we don't just win the future because of an assumption or because of arrogance. It is we are doing the dogged work. And that is something in Michigan we absolutely know how to do.
So if we reached a point of change in which talent no longer comes to jobs, and jobs tend to go to where the talent is?
I think that's been happening for a while, yeah. But I think that that's where it's really important. Kind of coming back to your question prior, you know, I'm seeing some Michigan Works friends that are in the room, and I think it's really important that the invitations and the communication occurs. So one of the things that I have seen that's been very challenging, coming from my previous government roles into automotive industry, is that the pace in which manufacturing operates is just lightning speed. And a lot of times we don't have the opportunity to really sit down and do a strategy around, well, what's around here? What could we tap into? It really has to be an invite that comes in that's very direct, clear. Can you be a part of this? Can you do this? Will you help us? And then it's always going to be a yes. I mean, I think that the communication part of that is so important, and the repetitive inclusion, because sometimes we miss emails, and I know that there are friends of mine in this room who will email me 2 or 3 times and be like, hey, did you see that? And it's not intentional, right? And so I think that constant communication and figuring out how to really create the strategy so that everyone understands their role, what the end goals are, and how we're going to help build out that talent. Because one of the things that Ford really focuses on is ensuring that we're able to hire locally. So from an EV perspective, we have 13. We have 13 plants that are EV focused. So they're either assembling an automotive EV or they're creating the components. 7 of those 13 are right here in Michigan. And we're very proud of that. We're very proud of the thousands of people we employ, and we want to continue that work. And in order to do that, we have got to work with those local ecosystems to get people upskilled and reskilled and ready to go.
Can I add to that? And I give Ford a lot of credit because I've watched their journey, and even Ann's role, right, is an indication of working with that workforce system, right, and figuring out how to collaborate. One of the great things is all the things we have going on here in the state of Michigan around workforce, but it is one of our challenges too, right, because as you said, it's complex. We're in it, and we kind of know, right, some of us, all the acronym soup, and a lot of it's in the room, right? We've got WIN here, we've got MW Tech, we've got the Leo Group, MEDC, right? You can already see where I'm going, Michigan Works, SME, right? So a lot of acronyms, and if you're an employer, we kind of forget how scary that is to walk into our world and weave that together. So I think this idea of really coming together with a holistic and a systematic approach to building our workforce strategy for our state, which the state just created a workforce strategy, right, I think early this year, launched that under the governor, which is a great, again, indication, because when we can be more intentional about those systems, right, we have a lot of things that are going on. The biggest challenge is making sure that people know about it. And we have to remember that our employers are just painfully busy. But yet, those that have people like Ann are fortunate, but a lot don't. And so I think your point about reaching into them, because we sit with those employers, and most of the time, we have our MEP. I don't know if Ingrid's here with MMTC as another acronym, MMTC. But a lot of our employers don't know of all those resources. So I think your point about collaboration together in that workforce system, our colleges, our nonprofits, we've got a heavy lift, because it's really our job to connect with the talent and the employers. We're kind of building the superhighway in between, but it's not an easy space.
So, I mean, this seems like a unique period for industry, and unique, this industry is in a unique position in that you're not flipping a switch and going from the old vehicles to these new vehicles. You're in this period of trying to build both and staff 2 really different workforces. What are the unique challenges of that?
Well, I'm on the EV side, so I can't really speak to the other side, but again, most of my work is outside of those 4 walls. So Ford does a tremendous job of internal training, always has. But what I am looking at is that pipeline external, which, like I said, in the past I think was a nice to have, but now is a must. And so how do we help people understand what that EV world looks like? Those are the things that I'm working on. And I think this panel too is a really good example of the partnerships, right? So you have industry, you have government, you have nonprofit, you have all the different groups working together to come to this conclusion that, like, this is not, to your point, this is not the end, right? Like, where we are right now is not the end goal of where we're trying to get. This will continue to evolve and advance. And I think even outside of the manufacturing world with Ford, you're seeing electric batteries take off a lot in recreation vehicles. You got e-bikes. I mean, that's something I would have dreamed of for, as a kid. I would have loved that. So the batteries are really getting into our everyday, and we're not even noticing it as much as it's happening.
Well, I was just going to say, I know we were going to maybe tap into the audience at some point too.
Yeah, we'll get there.
With all these amazing stakeholders here, but certainly a lot of respect for the approach. And I think about this, we're having this whole talent conversation, and it's also, you're an OEM that's in the business of selling these cars as well. So just as you're training, recruiting, training, and the like, we've got to sell not just to our North American base, but to the world here. And that was part of the cues that have been coming down from industry as well, is that global complex supply chains, global markets that we need to continue to tap into, and that's evolving and changing very quickly as well.
And everybody wants these jobs, and you see tremendous competition whenever Ford or Stellantis or GM says we're going to build a battery plant, we're going to build a place to assemble electric vehicles. What does Michigan need? Everybody wants to be the next Motor City. I mean, how do we remain the Motor City and the automotive capital of the world? What do we need to be thinking about?
Well, look, we see our auto industry in a major transition, and yet we see where the portion of jobs are going, and where I look at this as regional. We've got an automotive corridor. We're the headquarters of it. If you look at the 1980s, there was strong affiliation to the domestic auto industry. And now with these next generations, they're looking at what's coming down the pipe. And so when we think about our dealer structure, our sales structure, and look, I'm not in the business of selling cars. I want our domestic auto industry to win, but I want to respect, as a government official, that the private sector needs to be able to continue to do what it's going to do. We had Mich Auto in the room recently, or just an hour ago, and they've been having several panels and sessions on this very point. And the orientation is really coming down to our strategic competition with China. That is now a running theme. So of this conference. And so when you look at bridging the future together, we are all in this together. This is the bipartisan bright light of the United States Congress. How we've been able to come together to compete effectively. Why was the CHIPS Act bipartisan? It was bipartisan because of the motivations around research and development as the United States of America vis-a-vis our grand competition with the Chinese Communist Party. The other question of that, Nolan, is how we bring our allies along with us. So no pressure on and any of you, state partners, local partners in this room. You're leading the charge, not just here for Michigan, but frankly for the country, because we know that we're not going to be successful as a nation if we don't have a vibrant auto industry. So yes, I'm here from the government. How can I help you?
But I'm glad Congressman, I'm glad you mentioned China. And China would like to steal this whole industry away from us. And what are we doing, or what can we do to keep the Chinese in check here?
Well, it's not irresponsible leadership. We can't be talking out of both sides of our mouth saying, well, no one's going to buy these EVs, but China's going to come in and sell all these EVs to us. We've got to be steady. We've got to have steady hands. We've got to continue to support partners who've been doing this work and doing it for a long time. We also can't be asleep at the wheel, friends. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing. And Janine, I know you're at the table on this in many, many respects as well.
Yeah.
So let's take some time for questions.
This is so great. I really enjoyed this panel about what we can do in Michigan. I'm Don Tusky, President, College for Creative Studies, and I have a comment and then a question. If we could maybe consider using STEAM. At College for Creative Studies, we have transportation design, mobility design, and so many of us in this room actually are driving probably a car that one of our alums have worked on in terms of design, and that's a big area that Michigan actually has one of the biggest concentration of designers in the country, and so there's an opportunity certainly around transportation design when it comes to cars. We had SpaceX on our campus a couple weeks ago. We have alums working at Boston Dynamics, and we talked about robots. So there's a real opportunity for thinking about high school students going into not just art, but art and design. And we're actually, right now, we talk about K through 12. We teach very little art or design, and it kind of sort of boggles us in terms of that. And we're working at CCS to change that. My question, though, is if you could wave your magic wand, all the things you talked about, what would be one or two things that if you could just change right now to solve some of the challenges that you mentioned? That'd be great to hear, just to summarize some of the things you said. But thanks for the panel.
Well, we're not leaving you behind. You know, I say STEM all the time, but I say, oh, we got the A in there too. And look, just to paint the picture, my own mother tried to take an industrial design class when she was in school and was told she couldn't because of her gender.
Wow.
Fast forward, you know, she's had a great career in the private sector, but not totally tied to STEM, has continued to pursue that. So we're in a grand race on that front, and it's a profound and incredible that you're here. And we need to, as policymakers and as stakeholder conveners, we need to make sure you're still at the table. And you're absolutely right. So if I could solve one challenge, one wand I could wave, how about this? More money for our schools, more money to pay those art teachers, more money to pay substitute teachers, more programmatic dollars, and not just money for the personnel. We've got a bill in the Congress called Rebuild America's Schools Act, because what? We all know the environment matters. If you want to come to my district, West Bloomfield has a brand new middle school. This is state of the art. I'm ready to quit my job and work in that school. It's gorgeous. And that impacts everything, as we know.
Don't quit. We don't want you to quit. You're doing great work. I'll just add to that, and you have a great program. Congratulations on that program. I think we touched earlier, I think Ann touched on it, and the number of people who are on the sidelines who don't really have a job, don't feel like they have a purpose, they got lost somewhere in our system, and there's millions of them, you know, certainly across our country. So I think if people could, if I waved my wand, it's that people would see what we see, and just the amount and exciting opportunities that exist in all of manufacturing and certainly our automotive industry, the rewarding career plans that they could have, that would be for sure my wand.
Other questions? Right here.
Hi, I'm Bill Frymore with MEMA, the Vehicle Supplier Association. And I think one point I just want to make, how important Michigan is central still to this industry. 140,000 vehicle parts jobs are in Michigan. Mm-hmm. All of our companies, not all, but the vast majority have headquarters in Michigan. Mm-hmm. The driving force remains Michigan. My question is very simple. In the training area, we talk about government-industry partnerships being so important now, and Haley took it into broader public policy areas as well. That's one huge positive change. Every other country has that. We haven't, now we do. So the question is, what federal partnerships are important on the training and workforce development side for Michigan, if you had to pick one or two things, each of you? So a variation on my colleague's question.
Yeah. Well, we need to confirm our Secretary of Labor, Julie Sue. I mean, that's a big missing piece, and that's part of this ongoing dynamic in this country around who can actually lead. You know, we're so busy sometimes having these partisan battles that we're disadvantaging ourselves in the process. And I think another piece here, Bill, and we're delighted to hear you as a representative from the Motor Equipment Manufacturing Association say that Michigan continues to be the destination, is that we need to make sure that initiatives and programs, and you know, I see so many great technical school partners out here. Schoolcraft is in the room, and I worked with them years ago on a certification, a mill worker certification. Knowledge is power. We are in the information game, and I will tell you, we have, and I just say this as a federal representative, we have got to make sure that people know and the stakeholders know about the programs in place. And a big part of the work that we do is someone calls my district office located in Farmington Hills, you've got a federal issue, how can we help you? More broadly, We're in a race on daycare. We've got to make sure that our employers have access to good daycare. We see the employers stepping up on that part for their employees so that people are fully in the workplace. I'm on a bipartisan working group on paid leave. When we talk about the flexibility in the workforce, we can celebrate the 30-year anniversary of FMLA. Now we're looking to the future. We can't be the only country that doesn't have paid leave in the OECD index. And that's why that's been bipartisan, from the previous administration to this existing one.